and thanks, Abby. What the Secretary of State does, what it doesn't do, and also what she hopes to see in this role as she moves forward and is hopefully elected in just a few weeks. Before we get started too deeply into the conversation, a couple of housekeeping points. So the first is, as you just heard, Abby's going to be recording this Zoom session. We're going to be posting it to our website and to YouTube, so you'll be able to reference it later. And especially those who are not with us today, because today, as you may or may not know, is the Jewish New Year. And so we are so excited to make sure that we can share this with our friends who are unable to make it here today via recording. Also, we are live streaming this event. So one of the best things that we can do out in the social media world is to also send the information that we're putting together here out to people who maybe don't access this kind of information nearly as often. We know that social media often is a shorter snapshot in time. So one of the things that I'm going to ask Chelsea to do very early on is tell us who she is, what she's running for, and give us just a really high level overview of her platform and her campaign, so that those individuals who are out there in Facebook world can spend just a few minutes getting the quick download. Then we're going to go a little bit deeper here in our conversation in the next hour, talking about the questions that you all sent to me, and talking with Chelsea, getting real with Chelsea, because that's kind of the only thing you can do with Chelsea is get real with Chelsea. So,
I think we've got a new talk show. We
do get real with Chelsea. I like it. This is a great idea. So Chelsea, please, I would normally do an introduction, but because of this Facebook facing live stream, I would love for you to just tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you're running.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's been really nice to get to know many of you, and hopefully y'all are on here, and to meet some of you. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. You've got amazing strength and courageous leadership at the helm. And so I can see it. I'm seeing some things happen and unfold and holding people accountable. And it is absolutely beautiful to see women fight like y'all. So love that. But I am, yes, Chelsea Clark. I'm a councilwoman down here in the city of Forest Park, which is a suburb just outside of Cincinnati. I grew up in Allen County and in a place outside of Lima, if you know where Lima is. And so pretty small town. I'm a 6th-generation farmer. I'm a business owner, so I own a STEM education center. So science, tech, engineering, math, any given day. I'm like I was yesterday in my science lab, working with kids on chemical reactions. And I'm a mom. I'm a mom of 2 high schoolers. And so one just turned 14 last week. And, there's quite a few reasons for why I started, but it really boils down to 2. One, my father was, he marched in the civil rights movement. He was arrested in the Birmingham jail, yes, in '64. He was only 17 years old. And, I just quite frankly refused to continue to keep having to fight my father's fight. A generation later, his daughter's running for chief elections officer, so that we don't have to continue this struggle for inalienable rights or our birthright, right? Secondly, you've got this, I'm well suited in terms of being a business owner, small business owner, female minority business owner, and understanding our plight and how we can certainly make some improvements and advocate on behalf of our businesses. And then lastly, we have got to restore faith, integrity, and transparency in this office. The biggest issue that I am seeing, and that just, it makes my blood boil, is that we've got a Secretary of State who is absolutely hell-bent on making sure that party politics are at the center of all decisions, despite the will of Ohioans. And that's not how good government should work. Good government should not be in all of your business all the time. It should not be constricting. What good government is supposed to do is be, it's supposed to be trustworthy, and it's supposed to help you, and it's supposed to work for you and on your behalf. And that is not what we are seeing. And so I do believe that there is a threat to democracy with this current administration. And so we've got to get back to the basics, the tenets of our democracy, and making sure that everyone has access no matter their political affiliations. And it's going to take a moral courage to do that. I possess a moral courage. I don't have as much physical. I'm a little person. I'm 4'10", but but what I make up for in my physical strength, I sure as hell got in moral, and I get that, I get that honest from my daddy. And so I'm here with the Democracy for Ohio agenda.
That is one of the best introductions I have seen. That was fantastic, because not only do we know why you're running, we know who you're running for, right? The people of Ohio, and we are, a little more well-versed in your background and what makes you so specifically driven towards this particular job, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that, as I'm talking with folks around the state about the different offices that are up for election, sometimes people don't know what the Secretary of State does, right? They kind of generally know what the governor does. They often know what a legislature does, but the Secretary of State is a little confusing to them. Can you help? Last week, you and I talked about, okay, what are the roles? So can you help break down the roles for us into easily digestible pieces, so when our matriots go out in the world, they can say, here is what Chelsea Clark will work on?
Absolutely. So look, a few years ago, I didn't know all the ins and outs of the Secretary of State's office. I'm like, oh, a glorified secretary, so I'm gonna just file some paperwork. No, so it took some time, and the reason it took time to kind of, I wanted to get an intimate understanding of what was happening, because I was so frustrated and confused about what was happening to me. And so it really prompted me to, learn about these different offices. But first and foremost, the Secretary of State, now they varies from state to state. But one thing that makes them all connected is this chief elections officer responsibility, which is huge. You're talking about, quite honestly, the most vulnerable position in our nation right now. Because why? Because they also certify the elections. And so if we know anything about what happened in 2020, these Secretary of States come in all persuasions and can be persuaded, unfortunately, as opposed to just reading the data and reading the voters. And so it is a very, very sensitive role, and quite honestly, the gateway and your starting point when you're talking about a representative democracy. As the marquee democracy. I apologize for that. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, it came back. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. So as we have the marquee democracy worldwide, so chief elections officer, they do, and underneath that, they handle campaign finance. They also sit on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Now, that was not something sexy and big before last year, because we know that the only difference was in 18, 74.89% of Ohioans, which obviously are a great deal of both party folks, said, hey, you know what? We want redistricting reform. That means when we draw these lines on how our leaders are elected to represent these populations after the census, right? When we take our census and we figure out how many people are in a given place, it was extremely important, because that prompted, that was the first time that we were going to actually enact these reforms, meaning that the redistricting process had to look a certain way, had to make sure that it was non-gerrymandered. A gerrymander is when a particular party dilutes the votes based on how they draw lines out of certain communities, so that their representation now doesn't match the actual will of that set of population. And so that is what has happened. And so being a voting member on that commission is absolutely imperative, when we saw that 7 maps were struck down by the Ohio Supreme Court because our Secretary of State, had a hand and was instrumental in passing gerrymandered and unconstitutional maps. That is, you can't get any more out of line or a way or obstructionist, in my opinion, when it comes to the Ohio Constitution, because you do have to follow the law. It also, the Secretary of State's office also grants authority to do business in Ohio. So they document commercial transactions. They allow, businesses to function, whether they're here physically in Ohio or outside. And then lastly, they handle records certification and filing. So things like notaries, documentation certification, and of course keep historical records. So those are the three main responsibilities, and like I said, they can vary from state to state, but what aligns them or connects them is this ability to oversee all of the boards of elections, which we have 88 because we have 88 counties, and to certify those elections. So it's a pretty powerful role.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know that folks had paid much attention. You mentioned this a little bit. I don't know that folks had paid much attention to boards of elections or really, honestly, the Secretary of State role until about 2020, right? And maybe they had in the past, and I was living under a rock somewhere. But I think that this idea of who's overseeing the election, and both very locally, right, at the county level, and then at the state level, is so critically important when there are challenges to the election process. What challenges specifically have we seen in Ohio? We hear about them across the United States from the presidential election in 2020, but what are we seeing here in Ohio that we should keep our eye on?
Sure. So the most important and critical reason that I'm running for this seat and why I need to be elected is because we have got to restore faith and integrity and transparency to this process. The electoral process, this is the sanctity of our elections here. And democracy doesn't do well when it's challenged at such a persistent and intense level. And when you've got misinformation coming out, and you've got Secretary of State that's not going to be not going to take one side or the other in terms of, hey, was this election valid or was it not? That is problematic, because that speaks to who you are doing your job for, and whether you're doing it on behalf of Ohioans, or are you doing it because you're catering to outside influences. And this is one seat in particular where party politics has no business. It just doesn't. Obviously, I'm the Democratic nominee, but I can't think of another seat that's more red, white, and blue in our state than the Secretary of State's office, because you've got to let everyone have an unencumbered access. So one, we've got some misinformation. There was information that had gone out talking about the special election, which was August 2nd, but it gave two different dates. And so we've got to be very careful that our data is, or the content that we're putting out is very, very, very accurate, because people are building their schedules around it, working class families. We've got a reduction in early days and voting. Weekends of voting have been taken away. Golden Week has been taken away. That was a time where Ohioans could register to vote, and then in the same process also vote and cast their vote. And so that was a week-long process that we could do that, and that has been removed. And we saw increased participation and engagement in doing that. And again, very, 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 very little infinitesimal fraud while doing that at the same time. So we've also got a challenge with ballot box access. So secured ballot boxes are where we put our completed ballots. And if you've only got one in a state, which our current Secretary of State is promoting and defending having limited ballot box access, that makes it difficult. Look, I'm from the country, and those country roads are no joke. For folks having to drive 45 minutes just to get to the ballot box, think about economically what that means when you've got about a $20,000 differential in income in our rural places in Ohio. People in Frederickstown are not making the same as people in Columbus, in Metro Columbus. So that's going to make a difference. That hour and a half drive, that's going to hit your pocketbook a little bit differently. Not to mention the time for working families. So we have to get that right. We also do not have automatic voter registration when our children turn 18 years of age. That's if we can trust 16-year-olds. Now I have a 16-year-old that I don't fully trust with the keys yet. I'm working on it. It's a process. But by and large, when we legally, accept kiddos, 16 with 3,000 pounds of expensive metal and plastic, I certainly think that our 18-year-olds can handle pins at polling locations. And so that's something that I'll be igniting, once in office as well. So those are the things, making sure that we fight against extremism is absolutely critical, because again, you can have this can be a more limited government if done properly and you have the right processes in place and you are securing and defending democracy. But you're also responsible and tasked with kind of advancing democracy. So to what limits, if you will, can you take democracy so that people are fairly represented and people are actually heard? There's ways to do those things as well. So those are our most concerning challenges. Outside, and then additionally, unnecessary voter purges. In 2019, this Secretary of State led like almost a 400,000 voter purge, and when an independent organization came in to review, tens of thousands of those were eligible and folks that had just recently voted in the past 6 months. And so what we saw were targets. So communities of color were targeted. We saw younger people, late 20s to mid 30s targeted, and then Democrats to Republicans 2-to-1 targeted. And that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that this is fair, a fair process for everyone, and that everybody follows the rules. And that's what the Secretary of State's job is supposed to do. We also have a Secretary of State who's kicking people off the ballot. Just recently, last week, the Supreme Court, put back another candidate, an independent candidate, back on the ballot. So not just kicking off Democrats, but also Republicans and independents, and unless they're Republican friends. And again, this job has to be about working on behalf of the people. We are public servants.
And let's can we work through that last piece just a little bit, because I was going to ask a question about that, because we've had a couple candidates of ours where we've either wanted to endorse or have endorsed, and then they came up before the Board of Elections, and on a partisan level, 2-2. So maybe our folks don't know that the boards of elections of each of these 88 counties are comprised of 4 individuals, 2 who fall with a Republican side and 2 who fall with a Democrat side. We've had a couple of our candidates who have in a ballot or in a petition challenge been challenged as to whether or not they should end up on the ballot. And it came to party lines where the 2 members of their own party or their historical party voted to keep them on the ballot, and the 2 members of the opposite party voted to keep them off the ballot. And so those challenges go to the Secretary of State to break the challenge before the individual may or may not challenge the Secretary of State's determination before the Supreme Court of Ohio. And that process of, if you fail in front of the Secretary of State, going to the Supreme Court of Ohio can cost $10,000 or $15,000 in lawyers' fees and other fees in order to get before the Supreme Court and have a determination made. Plus, you're not yet on the ballot, and we are now tick-tock, just a couple weeks away from early voting. So can you tell us a little bit about that process and what you would maybe do to change some of this, if it's possible at all?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, the way you change it is first you have to have, you've got to be on the side of democracy. Maybe that's what I was born with my, country roots and eating everything on my plate. It's just one of those values that you grow up with. You do the right thing. My papa always said, be that job great or small, do it right or not at all. I've tried very, very hard to live by that. Of course, I make mistakes, and I think just as learning is concerned, but when it comes to, having my heart positioned in the right place and doing things, absolutely. That's just how you grow up. And so, I don't know how you I don't know how you encourage. The reason that this is so bizarre and why we are looking at why we had an unprecedented second primary is because in the law, if you look at how it was written, there was no intense consequence for these legislators if they did not produce a fair map. Think about that. Like in terms of logic, we have to think about the fact that we did not even consider, right, as an electorate or as a government, people obstructing the entire process from stem to stern the entire time. No one thought that our public officials or servants would do that. I mean, that's a big, that's a heavy thought process, that there wasn't even a valve in place that would hold them liable and accountable, and even, threaten their positions, because it's so unheard of to see political to see these political antics. And so I would say that, you've got to have someone, again, that's going to err on the side of the law. It was absolutely unlawful for him to have that independent removed from the ballot. It just was. So think about the economic consequence to decisions where I'm making decisions on behalf of me and only a few of my cronies, so that we can all make sure we get to be in the same on the same team. He's literally the umpire, on the winning team, and calling the shots. It's not something that is going to further our democracy agenda. And I say that in the broad terms, being inclusive of everyone, knowing the state that we're in. It's not going to help us in an economic manner. That cost, like you just said, look at how much it has to cost the ordinary person that would like to engage and participate in the political process, just to be heard and to have justice done on their behalf. Because if you don't have a Secretary of State that's willing to just do the right thing, then you've got to seek wholeness. That's a problem. That's costly, not just for them, but that costs taxpayers. This second primary that we had cost us over $25 million. And I don't know about you, but I don't have enough money in that to feel like we're wasting it as a government either. And so I think these the political antics and extremism has gone so far that this current Secretary of State has even called out the Republican Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, and wanting her calling for her to be brought to the carpet based on her decision, in terms of siding with what they consider to be Democratic chief or justices, rather Supreme Court justices, because of the unconstitutional maps. And so anytime you're trying to attack these people that are making decisions, it's very problematic. And so I would say, in essence and in conclusion, that you've got to first operate by the law. And if they've met those standards, especially when people are trying to meet deadlines and trying to abide by the law that you have broken, and they are now subsequent to having to operate in, you've got to operate on the side of, again, of democracy and equal access.
I think that is the perfect encapsulation of some of the challenges that we're feeling, as we sit and we watch. There's not a whole lot the individual feels like they can do to change the system. Nancy's got a great point in the chat here. She said impeachment is the word we were looking for.
Yeah, thank you.
I actually looked down at my paper to start.
Nancy. Yeah, I was thinking, these curls, I just couldn't. Let me drink some more coffee, Nancy.
It happens to me too. And so thank you, Nancy.
I mean, you can't throw a fit because the rule you didn't follow by the rules and you got spanked. You can't get mad about that.
We discussed last week that there just seemed to be a lot of finger pointing. It's a whole lot of this when, if you're on the redistricting commission and the redistricting commission does not come to a determination, you can't then, and it's found that the maps that come out of that are unconstitutional. You can't then blame the Supreme Court for the time delay when you now need to do a second election. One question. So it was really fast finger pointing, and that in and of itself was really interesting, but detrimental.
On our dime, I think that's cost us over $870,000 just all the litigation. I mean, Okay, I'm a fiscal conservative over here. I'm a business owner, a small business owner. We don't have many pennies to rub together. I'm a single mom of two kids that, they came in here broken and needy. And so there's a lot of things to cover. And it doesn't make sense to me. Just because it's not your money doesn't mean you should waste it. All the decisions that we're making have financial consequences.
Well, and I was going to ask just a quick follow-up on that to empower our members to understand a little bit more about these costs. We didn't really discuss this, but the special election that was held, you told us that there was a specific cost that was attached to 25 million, maybe attached to holding a special election. What are some of the things that go into, what are some of the costs or considerations that a Secretary of State would have in thinking about, do I hold another election? What factors into that?
Sure, you've got personnel costs, you've got people costs that have to actually man these locations, and then also tabulating the ballots and preparation of the ballots, and then the ballots in and of themselves. Paper ain't cheap. Like, so that's also something. And if I will go just a wee bit further with this addition, with him making such an extremist party minded decision with the exclusion of this individual, this independent, from the ballot, and now the Supreme Court putting someone back on, the ballots now have to be changed. Like, so now you've got work behind the scenes that has to get done. Again, we're going to pay for that. There's going to be some costs associated with that. But then in addition to that, the advertisement of the special election, hardly our numbers, our engagement, it was what, I think we hadn't seen numbers like that since the 60s. That's because no one knew about the damn thing. I mean, they just didn't. Nobody knew. Who are we voting for? We're voting based on a legal map. What is happening? People didn't even know. So you've got an educational campaign, or not an educational, but an advertisement campaign to even let people know what's happening. And then so those are your in a sense kind of your three main costs when you're thinking about that. There are of course there's other ancillary costs to consider, but those are kind of in terms of basically the bulk of what you're looking at in those costs.
And in the chat here, Julie has posted a comment that says, if anyone follows Supreme Court cases, so Supreme Court of the United States cases, she notes that there's one in front of them now that centers on the independent state legislatures theory that's been advanced. And it tracks with Secretary of State LaRose calling for the O'Connor impeachment. So to the Matriots on the call today, we'll take a look and find that case, send it out your way to make sure that you're aware of this work. And also thank you, Julie, for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you, Julie. May I add, Ms. Shriver, may I just add this as Shriver, that so one of the issues we also have is we've got to have a Secretary of State that's going to champion federal policy. There has got to be federal policy put in place. Voting Rights Act, John Lewis. Okay, so there's got to be federal policy put in place, much like another codification that we would like to have, so that these states aren't going to be willy-nilly in how they allow freedom of voting to actually happen. That way they can't dictate, oh, only these certain groups get to be a mouthpiece.
So in the future, would you advocate for better federal policy or better state policy, or both, over the elections process? And again, I didn't float this question with you beforehand. So if you say, I don't know, I'd have to think about it. I just
brought it up, right? No, I'm absolutely in support of federal. I mean, because I think that we all, from the Voting Rights Act to now, right? Almost 60 years, right? I think we all looked at this thing and thought to ourselves, whoa, wait a minute. Are you telling me that our voting rights are weakening? They're changing, they're diminishing? That was not, when we think of the United States Supreme Court decisions on these human rights, on these civil rights, we think about them being in stone. We don't think about them being, written in pencil. And so because of those things that were lifting after a time, we saw states breaking away and making all of these, wackadoodle, voting policies. Look at Georgia. Oh, so you're going to make it a misdemeanor for me to hand water to someone waiting in line to vote? We can stand in line at concerts and eat a whole entree. It's unfathomable, it's unconscionable that these extremist legislatures that are supermajority led are allowed to do this. And because we don't have federal policies that are keeping these gates tight so that freedom can actually happen and democracy can flourish, it is happening. And so I absolutely support federal legislation, and will support any state legislation that upholds our Ohio Constitution and makes sure that our birthright and all eligible citizens of Ohio can actually vote unencumberedly. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to me anyway, it is a key hallmark of a democracy that we're able to vote,
That's
right?
kind of what, I mean, I went to school for political science and business, so that's what I learned democracy to be. So representative democracy.
Let's pivot for just a few minutes to one of the other jobs that the Secretary of State has, which we talked a little bit about, is close to your heart as well. And that is the certification of businesses. You're a small business owner, and you talked a little bit about that in your intro. What would you see as good policy around business certification, economic empowerment, especially for, we care a lot about women here at the Matriots, so especially for women or women-owned small businesses. And we'll get back to election commentary in a couple minutes, but what are some of your thoughts there for the role of the Secretary of State?
Sure. So I believe that, the Secretary of State has a lot to do with championing small businesses, women-led businesses, minority, veteran. And because I've got some country roots, I've got a lot of country roots, I'm also very partial to our farms. So now, a little bit different of a conversation, but they're still small businesses. They're typically mom and pop businesses. And when you see a lot of the takeover and encroachment from these huge corporations that are gobbling up hundreds of acres at a time, what that tells us is that we don't have that champion that's saying, hey, wait a minute, these small businesses, these are rural communities that have often been kind of deserted, right, by big industry, manufacturing, places that have closed their doors. You've got these family farms still breaking backs and paying decent wages to hardworking folks. And so we don't see them getting the necessary supports and resource access that they could be. We're also, when you look at minority and women-led businesses, Ohio Legislative Black Caucus had an event last year. They did an excellent job at looking at how we're going to utilize these federal dollars for not only minority empowerment, but like minority communities, and how they're going to advance education, advance business ownership. Business ownership was the group that I set in on, and we, created some pillars or some a roadmap, if you will, of what we wanted to see as small business owners. And the existing, Secretary of State was not present to do that work, which is why I've been supported by Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, and the president endorsed me. So it's also about them showing up, not when it's election time, but showing up and championing these businesses and talking about how they can have the access to these much needed funds, and how they're going to use their positions to better to copy these best practices that we're seeing around the state. What I will be doing once elected is creating an office of entrepreneurship that is going to be in conjunction with a few other departments, of course, and commerce and whatnot. But looking at these best practices, how do we have a one-stop shop for our small businesses that that's difficult to have attorneys at the helm, and high powered accountants that can help us to make those really important decisions when we're paying our taxes, and typically paying everyone that works for us more than we pay ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so they do a lot when it comes to that. Our portal is also concerning. We need to have a very easily accessible portal. That's the online infrastructure that we have set up, and also our business data. You know, there's some security challenges. We're in a space of constant technology, right? So making sure that we're beefing up our security around our private business data is very, very important. I would love to see a database where we can access businesses from across the state and understand what's happening with them, and that academia can have access to that information, and other entities that it could be used for, especially when it comes to economic development. I'm the vice chair of our Economic Development Commission for the city. And, you know, our job is tasked with retention, acquisition, and you know, efforts for businesses, and how we create these relationships um, and access is really that's what all of this is about, is making sure that there's access and people understand how to navigate the system. And I think that we can do a whole lot better.
Well, and I love this idea of what did you call it? A department of entrepreneurship, a committee of entrepreneurship?
The Center for Entrepreneurship.
Center for Entrepreneurship, because one of the
There's a
things,
lot of really great practices. I've been traveling the state for a year, and I mean, even some of the stuff in Canton they're doing, it's some really, there's just some beautiful things that are happening. We just have to get more in touch in this space and community, especially when you're seeing so many people that are from the pandemic that are forced to start their own businesses. So you need business processes that are going to meet that demand, and also be sustainable. There's a reason we're not in the top 10 for the nation in, you know, starting and sustaining small minority and women businesses.
when I was going to say that normally the mainstream type of businesses, small businesses, not set up necessarily by women or by people of color, have a harder time connecting to resources. So this will allow for a space where you don't just have to know somebody already in the field who's going to connect you with more resources. This will allow you to be able to do it a little more streamlined and take away some of the advantage versus disadvantage types of entrepreneurship.
There's also issues just in terms of that you're right, Mrs. Shriver. That's a huge element to this. Another significant element that we're finding. I was at the Black Tech Weekend in Cincinnati, and one of the issues we're having as well is just in how you've got to have just in how things are worded on applications. Affect what we're able to get as women-led and minority businesses. There's certain ways that you can ask questions, and there's certain thresholds that are sometimes just not considered when these processes are happening. So there's even got to be diversity awareness even in that process.
As usual, expanding your awareness, right, allows for you to put a different lens on all of the processes that happen across the state. One of the other things that you mentioned, Councilwoman, is that you talked a little bit about data from a business perspective. I personally, as kind of just an anecdote, I wanted a little bit of information out of the Secretary of State's office about the 2019 election. I was very interested in how many people across the state of Ohio, simple question, how many people across the state of Ohio voted in the 2019 election? I wanted to compare it to the 2021 election just to see, okay, where are we? And did we have way more people vote last year after 2020, way less people? Because the Matriots are a data-driven organization. When I couldn't find it online, I sent a public records request to our dear friends at the Secretary of State's office in the hopes of getting the 2019 election data. Really simple. How many people voted? And the response was, we didn't capture that information for 2019. Therefore, there is no public record for the number of people in the state of Ohio who voted in 2019. That's held by the Secretary of State, because there was no statewide initiative. Therefore, they did not collate that information. I think this is just one of many. This is my own personal anecdote of having a challenge getting information out of the Secretary of State's office. I wonder if you have any perspective on similar election data, or how you would do it differently, perhaps, if it's possible to do it differently, and maybe it's not across the state, but just some thoughts on election data, because just that basic information of who's voting, when they're not not your actual vote, right? We don't want to know that, but how many people are voting in the state of Ohio? Is it a big issue that people aren't voting? Are more people registering? How can we improve that kind of information?
Um, I absolutely agree. I think it's I do think that I think it's really concerning um when you have that office that is not keeping that data, because that data, I mean, data is golden, but data is only golden when you use it for when you wield it for good, right? But it tells us a lot. It gives us a lot of information. And what I don't believe is that data is just not public information. The data is known. Let's not act as though, it's just in the ether somewhere. The data is understood and learned and kept, I believe. Um, and and so it can be very useful to whomever has it. But what I will say is that, yes, I absolutely do believe that the election results should be tabulated overall. I think that we should have that information also by county, which there are some breakdowns in terms of like provisional and absentee ballots and things like that, but there's not a and then when I talk about making things one-stop shop as well, this information can be all laid out, and I think that that'd be a better. I'd rather spend some money on crunching numbers so that so that Ohioans can have a degree of transparency to see how votes are actually moving in any given election, versus having random additional elections because we voted on unconstitutional maps. So I'm in agreement with you, and that's one of the things that I'll also endeavor to do to make sure that when people come to these sites, right, that the information is clear, it's easily understandable, and it's transparent. When I say transparency, it's not about just being transparent in how we're, I voted, I'm colluding with my friends on the commission and I'm voting for this. And then I'm sending secret text messages to state representatives of my party saying, hey, you may want to stay in this district because this map hasn't come out yet, but this is what we're going to do, which is what has actually happened, right? We saw those things play out. But that's one degree of transparency. Another degree of transparency is what are we actually looking at in terms of our registered voters and how they're actually doing it. Because what that is going to tell us is it's going to tell us trends. It's going to tell us great information that people need to know in terms of how our economy is moving, how is government and business working, and these decisions that we're making working for people or not. And it also, and this is one thing that I can't wait to do once elected, is really digging in and working with kids, because my business is around children, but making sure that our seniors, our high school seniors, are very well educated, and that we bring and we breathe new life into our civic engagement process is absolutely imperative. If you look at what's happening right now, these kids don't give a ding dang about, I mean, they don't give a crap about any of it. Okay. The only thing they need to know is my cell phone bill paid, mom, so I can do TikToks. Like, that's all they want to know. But all of these, we have so many of these decisions that are going to be affecting them, where they're going to go to college, how much debt they're going to pay, are they going to be able to afford a home? These decisions are about to be right in their face. And it's really, really important that we get them, we reel them back in, and we create opportunities for them to engage. And those are the places that so when you're looking at that data, that can also help us in making sure that our young people are part of this engagement process, and we know which areas also to target, to make sure that that they're aware of politically what's happening and where we need to spend additional resources as well. At least then people in different counties can more easily understand, or sorry, at the state level can more understand what's happening in districts.
One of the questions that we got off of Facebook here, I think, is a really interesting one. It's a little more specific than some of the questions I've asked, but they're interested in knowing a little bit more about photo ID and whether you support loosening voter ID laws in Ohio or strengthening them. And this was a worry for Hannah out in the Facebook world. So what do you think around voter photo IDs?
Sure. Well, thank you, Hannah, for the question. So in the state of Ohio, there are a few things you need. You do need what I don't agree with. I'll tell you what I don't agree with first. So there has been some legislation that's been brought before the State House that has some limits when it comes to it's basically voter suppression tactics in my opinion. And one of them was asking for 2 IDs. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that that's really something difficult for especially our college kids to do, to have 2 IDs and have your information on both of them. I don't know if very many adults I even have that. But there are several different types of valid. So I agree with one ID requirement. There are several different types of IDs that a person can have. They can have a state issued ID. Of course, they don't have to just have a driver's license, and it has to be it cannot be rather expired. You can have a military ID as well. There's bank statements, there's utility bills. So I'll just say in essence, I do agree with the requirements that are set forth by Ohio's voter requirements as of right now. What I don't think is that we continue to push and demand and ask for additional forms of ID that are really difficult for us to do.
And I think one of the concerns that has been around additional IDs has been the cost of achieving or getting an
Sure.
ID.
It's kind of like, so a lot of people liken it to poll taxes in kind of a lower sense, because it's like this idea of paying to vote, which I also don't think we should have paper stamps to send back our ballots. I don't care. It's those cents, I still want them. I don't want paper. And so yes, I think that that's part of the problem, and that's my secondary argument for why an additional ID should not be required, is because of the financial cost that, if you're poor or you don't have as many, economic resources, that you would be required to spend in order to have that requirement met.
Yeah, I think that's been a historic issue in the United States, right? That the access to the voter booth should not necessarily be determined by how wealthy you are.
Absolutely not. And listen, this would be an issue in the event that we had rampant voter fraud and so many people just can't wait by the thousands, to cast illegal ballots. And that ain't the case. That's just not happening. We had less than, it was like 0.001, under 0.001%, or at least it was 0.01%. I know for sure that we had in voter fraud. Now, as a businesswoman, that's, if I gave you a bar graph of 5.9 million voters, and I said, 100 people, less than 100 people, set forth the intentionally fraudulent ballot, it's not going to even make the bar graph. And so, not that any degree of voter fraud is acceptable, of course, but extreme decisions like that are only made when you've got threats to democracy and threats to the electoral process. And we're not seeing that type of an internal threat, if you will. What we're seeing are outside forces that are trying to dismantle and make people believe that our election processes are so terrible and they're just, ridden with unscrupulous behavior. And when in fact, there's really the folks that are sitting in power that are unfortunately doing a few unscrupulous things.
It is the definition of gaslighting, right? It's like, am I crazy?
I have become very familiar with that term.
Maybe I'm crazy.
It is.
So I know that we're coming up close to time here, because I can't believe that we've already been together for almost an hour. This has been, I know.
Has anyone left? Or they like, we're so tired of this?
No, not really. The people are here, they're listening, they want to know what you have to say. I'm happy if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, I'm happy to go ahead and pass that on to Chelsea. But one of the things, Councilwoman, that I'm interested in is what can it's just me, it's just Lucinda, it's just Valerie, it's just Chris.
It
We're
is not just
everyday.
you guys.
I know, we're just
You
everyday individual people.
individually, look, we didn't need, none of us woke up to be weak women today, okay? Not any of us on this call. And each of us has these spheres of influence. And we all know collectively at least 20 other amazing bad women, because I'm on life, amazing women. And so it is our response. I'm sorry. I was thinking I already knew your question and I just
You got
bulldozed
it.
you.
You've got it. What can we do? What can we
So what
do?
so what we're gonna do is we're gonna show up. We've already had an 11% bump in women voters being registered in Ohio. That is huge. And people are saying, hey, wait a minute. If you look at the 6 state seats right now, what do they look like? We could cut out any 6 of our like pretty much our presidents and just say, there they are. So it is very homogeneous mix. And there ain't not one woman that sits in the state in one of those 6 state seats right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're making all of these decisions about us, and we make up almost half of the state. That should really make everyone pause. What are we doing here? When you look at these ballots, you have 2 very distinct ballots that we are going to see. You need to pay very close attention to where women are on these ballots. On our side of the ballot, we've got 3 folks running for Supreme Court Justice. We've got myself running for Secretary of State, and we've got a lieutenant governor and governor candidate running. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 women on a ballot. Do you know what happens when women get in positions of authority? We make stuff happen. Yes, when women lead, it is not a game. We are great at multitasking. We not only do we lead from the heart, but we are darn strong. And we don't cave under pressure because we're used to dealing with, our bodies were built to withstand a whole lot of pressure. And we have had to go over obstacles in every sphere of influence we've had, and all these walks on this journey. And so what better place to have them? If I'm elected, I will be only the 10th woman to sit in one of the 6 state seats. Of course, everybody else on the ballot I'd love to come with, but only the 10th. We are more than 200 years old. Mm-hmm. You can't tell me that we are not making decisions that are hurting us as Ohioans because we lack representation that actually looks like Ohio. And so when you're talking to people, that's what you're talking about. Your job is to talk to somebody next door to you, because I'm telling you, no matter whether I'm in Ashtabula or I'm in Brown County or Jackson County, people are feeling the same stuff. You can be in the city or you can be in the sticks, and people are still feeling like their government is not working for them, that all these people want to do is collude and keep the money for their buddies at the top, and they're not hearing a word they're saying. We are worse off in the past 20 plus years than we have been. We used to be the leader in voting rights in the nation, and we are an absolute embarrassment. Understand, we are an embarrassment. These past 2 elections have been a debacle, complete and utter mismanagement of money, corruption at every turn, and leaders who absolutely just say, you know what, it doesn't matter if you voted for it or not. Guess what? We just ain't gonna pay any attention to it, and we're just not gonna do the will of you. We're gonna do the will of our donors. That is absolutely not the purpose of democracy, and that is not how we can sustain what we have remaining of it. And so when you get some people in there, do you want them to be hardworking people? I was a PTA president. I was a Cub Scout leader for 3 years for my kid, and we almost got drowned in a tent that I didn't spray with waterproofing. I know what it's like to be a mama out here and a business owner and having to, cart kids to and from. And then I know what it's like to have people not hear you. I know what it's like to have a government like, you're trying to keep up with your taxes, especially after a divorce, and you're trying to make it. And you may even have a degree or you may not. And it's still just as hard as if you just don't have anything. That is not the way this government is supposed to work for us. And I know sure as hell, and I'm darn tootin', I'm telling you this, Ohio is better than that. And Ohio deserves better than that. We have demanded it. We've asked for it. We've begged for it. We've petitioned for it. And it has been ratified. And it is time that we get what we've asked for and demanded.
I don't think I can follow up on that. We as the Matriots, we have been working to get women elected, to get women at the table. The women that you've listed today are all Matriots endorsed candidates, right? So we have Nan Whaley as a Matriots endorsed candidate. We have given her as much as we can to get her elected, along with Cheryl Stevens, who we've invested in previously. We can't invest in this race, but we've invested in her previously, and she aligns with our values. And all three of those Supreme Court candidates, Jennifer Brunner, Marilyn Zayas, and Terry Jamison, all three are Matriots endorsed candidates right alongside you. And so we are so excited to be able to support these women who are changing the face of what Ohio will look like and what Ohio needs to look like. And Chelsea, the fire that's within you, I hope that our Matriots take that from the call today, right? And take that to their conversations in order to engage individuals, to get behind your campaign, but then also to get behind the other women who are running and to change what Ohio's doing. Right? We don't have time to sit around.
We don't. We don't. Our
time.
daughters are going to suffer. There is legislation that are putting our children at risk. I got to worry about whether my kid can come home from school. In Princeton City Schools, a couple days ago had an active shooter threat. Do you know the mayhem that happened here in Cincinnati? Traffic and people genuinely terrified. This stuff is hitting us this is hitting us in our lap. As a mother of a young Black child, when I talk about him being 16 and driving, it's not just because, he's got some maturity to get to. It's about what is going to happen to him out there. And it's my son coming back home. It's about me being terrified for him. I know what that's like. It's very concerning. I understand what we are going through as mothers. You know what I mean? And when we've got a government that is just completely ignoring the majority of our constituents, it's a problem. This is a serious, serious problem. We've got people that are actors up here making decisions about our lives. Healthcare access is going to be absolutely huge, especially for young women. My daughter's 14 and she's going to have less rights than my granny. That's insane. What the hell are we doing?
We're sitting here with you fixing it. We're sitting here with you to fix it, right?
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate it. I got a little excited, but I do appreciate it. And I thank all the work that these young women, all these women, young and seasoned and wise, are doing across the state with your organization. Well done. You've increased the membership. I'm really excited, and I love the way it looks and how you're just engaging people. You guys are doing the nitty gritty. We got to keep on doing it. I certainly need some, I can use some contributions. I'm well out fundraising. I had taken a few weeks off to care for my father, who I lost just a few weeks ago. So thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the encouragement. Please send prayers and good vibes, and God bless every one of you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, for inspiring us to action, right? We know what we need to do. That was a very clear call to action. I feel like I'm going to get off this call and call 20 of my closest friends and talk with them about how they can get engaged and what they can do to change the direction that Ohio is going. For the Matriots on the call today, thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Councilwoman Clark, for coming with us today, coming along on this journey, educating us about the Secretary of State's race and about what you hope to do in the future. For the Matriots on the call today. Oh, you have one more thing. I see a finger.
I'm sorry. Early voting begins October 12th. So registration ends by October 11th. And so if each of us on this call can endeavor to get, or I keep saying, y'all know I go to church, right? So the pastor always says endeavor. But if we can get each of us to say, let's get 7, that's my favorite number. If we can each get 7 people registered before October 11th, that is going, what's that? 7 times 11 of us, that's 77 additional folks registered. Okay. So if we can do that, and then, send out some text messages. Please send out. I'm on Facebook, Chelsea Clark for Ohio. I'm on Twitter, Chelsea Clark. That's a blue check. And I'm also on Instagram. Please send out my handles to your friends when you're asking them to vote, because I don't have those dollars and funds to do television advertisements. You ain't gonna see it. I wish I could, but I'm not. And so those dollars are going to be, they are greatly needed because I'm still traveling on a daily basis. And that social media presence is really, really helpful in a ripple effect. So if you could please share that and like my page, it would be great. I'd be greatly appreciated. And now I'm be quiet.
No, that was perfect. That was the exact way we should end. So thank you so much, Matriots, those in the Zoomosphere, those in the Facebook world over here on this other computer that I have. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining Councilwoman Clark in this conversation for a little bit of tea to the heart today, but also direction where we need to go. We're going to head onward with the Matriots. If you haven't renewed your membership, please do so. But otherwise, get out there and get people registered to vote and vote yourself. Thanks so much and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.